All right, welcome, everybody. We are so excited that you could join us tonight and make some time to connect and to hear all the wonderful presentations at Show and Tell. We're really excited about this year's group. And this is one of our most popular events of the year. So we do this annually, and we get to hear from usually 3 or 4 talented groups of designers who share a story about a recent project they've done. So we're really excited about these topics tonight. And we're excited to hear about the trials and triumphs from our UX community. Before we jump into that, we want to go over to I want to go over some webinar logistics, just so everyone knows. Your video is going to be off by default. That's just to create a sense where there aren't a bunch of people when the presenters are presenting. And in the same vein, you will be muted by default. During Q&A time, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can always ask it in the chat. If you want to make general comments or have a discussion throughout the night, feel free to do that in the chat. Just remember to send it to panelists and attendees, or else only a couple of us are going to get it. But of course, if you have a specific question to just the panelists or just one of us, make sure you send it to us. Zoom does have a closed captioning feature if you need to turn it on. I believe it is up in your view or meeting.
Yeah, I just turned it on.
I always forget where this is, or it might even be down at it's actually down at the bottom of your screen. It says Ben had to turn it on in order for me to see the option as a viewer. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a live transcript button if you would like to use closed captioning. And just in case you missed the announcement earlier, this event will be recorded and we will share it online. So by participating, you agree to that. And as always in this new virtual world, thank you for dealing with any technical hiccups or difficulties we encounter. Now on to some fun stuff. Who are we? So for those of you who are not familiar with PhillyCHI, we are the local chapter of ACM SIG-Chi, and we've been around for about 15 years curating networking and educational events for the UX community in Philadelphia. So we're really dedicated to UX knowledge sharing and kind of exposing this field to students, professionals, anybody who wants to join, who is interested. And we really could not be doing this every day without each and every one of you who come to the events. So thank you so much for taking evenings out of your lives to spend with us so we can make this all possible. I also just want to note that we're really committed to supporting a respectful environment for our members to come together and talk about UX. So if you see any behavior that is unacceptable during the event tonight, please notify one of the board members, or you can feel free to reach out to us via email at phillychi@gmail.com. And also we encourage everyone to visit our website, read our code of conduct, and check out everything else on there. I'm going to pass it on over to Raeesha.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our September event. Let me introduce our PhillyCHI 2021 board. So Ben Swofford, so we are a bunch of volunteers and you'll meet us throughout the event. So Ben Swofford is the chair, Remi, Gurak, who just spoke before me, she's the vice chair. Then we have Benjamin Dolly, the treasurer, and myself, I am the secretary. So for tonight's schedule, we already spoke about who we are and the board. Next, I'll talk about job time. And at 6:45, we'll start our presentations, and each presentation will be followed by a Q&A, of course, time permitting. And at 8 o'clock, we have a raffle, so make sure to stick around because then we'll announce the raffle winners. So for tonight's event, we have these 3 awesome books that's been given to us by Rosenfeld. And at the end of the event, I'll announce the 3 winners. And also I'll follow up to get the addresses so that we can deliver a physical copy of these books. So for all of you who's joining PhillyCHI event for the first time, we have a job time at every event where we try to connect job seekers with companies that are hiring. And since we are a local chapter, we only concentrate on Philly-based companies. So I'll start with people or companies who are hiring. If you have an open role, please add that link in the chat box. And also, if you would like to talk about the role or the company, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you can talk to the audience.
I'm seeing Rick Boyer, so I'll unmute you, Rick.
Hello, everyone. Testing 1, 2, 3. My name is Rick Boyer. Thanks again for putting on these great events, the PhillyCHI team. I've been actually from the other side for quite a few years, so it's nice to be on this side as the user experience manager. I work for a company called Quadratech. So if there's any Jeep enthusiasts or Jeepers, feel free to perk up your ears. You might know who we are. We are a locally based vehicle company, the leader in Jeep aftermarket parts, locally based in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And thankfully through COVID, we've been one of the companies in the industries that have been fortunate enough to be thriving through COVID and are currently expanding multiple teams. I'm the new experience manager here, but there are multiple teams that are currently actively looking. We have a social media manager position, creative design manager position, full stack developers. So if you know any web developers on the market, we also have multiple graphic artist positions also available. Like I said, we're thriving right now. So we're really looking to expand and have a lot of exciting plans over the next 6 months to a year. Feel free to contact me. I'll put my information in the chat. Always open to connect with UX professionals, now, and then obviously after we fine tune our roadmap a little bit, I'll probably be looking to expand the UX team a little bit down the road, but at least right now, that's some of the openings we currently have, and happy to connect with everyone, and I'll put my information in the chat. Thanks.
Anyone else then?
I'm not seeing any other hands. I think that's it. I'll give a quick shout out to my company, Forefront. We don't have any UX specific roles right now, but we are hiring for several jobs, entry-level SEO, analytics, and project coordinator positions. I'll pop that in the chat too, in case anyone's interested. Oh, I do see a hand from Lindsay.
I just wanted to, I wanted to pop in the Think Company careers as well. I know Think is hiring for a variety of different positions, so wanted to pop that in there as well.
Okay, great. So so for
you have one more person, Raeesha, actually.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll pass it to Christina. Oh, the hand's down now. Here we go. You should be unmuted, Christina, if you're ready.
Hi, I'm actually Christina's husband, Jordan, using her account here. But I just wanted to plug Vanguard. I started with them as a senior UX designer June 1st. And so I'm pretty new, and they have a lot of new people there in the past year, actually. And they're looking to hire a lot more on their in their client experience and digital team, which is a lot of UX design, product design, research, analysts, that side of things. So I will try to grab a link to drop in the chat as well. Hey, Rick. Thanks.
Is there anyone else?
Thank you. I think maybe Advait was your hand up. I think I might have accidentally lowered it.
Yeah, it was. I was just going to point out that at Lutron as well, we're actively hiring for both researchers and interaction designers. I don't have a link on me right now, but I can try and figure that out and drop it in the chat. Or if there's a way to reach out to the community later, that'd be fantastic as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's all the hands, Raeesha.
Okay, awesome. So if you are someone who's looking for a job, feel free to reach out to this individual and know more about the roles and the company. And also you can drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat if you want. So I'll pass it on to Ben now.
Great, thanks, Raeesha. So hi, everyone, I'm Ben. It's my honor today to give a shout out to the sponsors who make PhillyCHI's events possible. Vast majority of our events are free to attend. That's thanks to the support of organizations here who give us money. Our annual sponsors this year are Think Company, O3 World, Rosenfeld, whose books you saw earlier, Vanguard, and Blue Plate Mines. And tonight's event sponsor is Think Company. This is several years now running that Think has partnered with us on the show and tell event. And Lindsay's here to talk a little bit about Think.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wodowitz. I'm a senior experience designer and researcher at Think Company. Think Company is an experience design and technology consultancy. We've been around since 2007, employing consultants across 2 studios and remotely, with expertise in almost every industry. We pride ourselves on using a research-driven methodology, which ensures our design decisions are always based in evidence. We specialize in research, strategy and visioning, content strategy, full experience in service design, digital product design, and software development. We exist to help create great experiences for our clients, their users, and our employees. I did post the jobs link in the chat, but I didn't mention we are currently have open roles in design, technology, content strategy, client relations, and product management. So if you're interested, please follow the link. We would love for you to come think with us.
Awesome. Thank you again, Lindsay. Okay, so I want to give a quick shout out to our next event, which in October, I think it's October 5th. It's not quite announced yet, but we will be having a speaker from Google speaking on data accessibility. We're really excited about this. We'll be covering the intersection of data visualization and accessibility. It's a really interesting topic that we're excited about. So stay tuned and register for this exciting event. With that, I'll pass it to Benjamin Dolly.
Hey guys, I'm Benjamin Dolly, and tonight I'm thrilled to present our fantastic group of speakers. Up first, we have Advait Tinaikar. He is a UX designer at Lutron Electronics, and he will be presenting with Quinn Wang, who unfortunately could not join us tonight. And you want to advance us to group number 2? Group number 2, we have Soumya Jindal, who is a graduate research assistant at the University of Washington, Shelby Zink, product designer at Microsoft, Antonio Eggermont, a senior app development lead at the Walt Disney Company, and Kevin Philbin, who is a lecturer at the University of Washington. On to group 3, we have Chelsea Miller, who is a UX researcher at YouTube Music, and Sophie Ambercar, who is also a UX researcher for YouTube TV. Unfortunately, Sophie is having some power outages tonight, so Chelsea will be going solo. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Advait to present Reimagining How to Set Up Smart Home Products. Advait, take it away.
Looks like you're muted.
You're on mute, sir.
Oh, of course. This happens to me all the time. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Ben. As Ben mentioned, I'll be presenting solo today, but I'm just going to share my screen and just get us on the road here. So thanks again, everyone, for having me and listening to our story. So, as Ben mentioned, my name is Advait. I'm a UX designer at Lutron Electronics. And today I want to speak through a work-related project that I did at Lutron a few years ago, focused around setting up smart home products. But the general theme is going to be around IoT experiences today. And I know my internet connection can be a little unstable at times. So at any point, please feel free to stop me and let me know if anything feels a little wonky. A little introduction about myself. So you can see me as a happy camper there with Yosemite in the background. I'm a UX generalist, have had the opportunity to lead both research and interaction design projects over this past 4 years. And primarily, I've had the opportunity to work in the smart home and IoT space currently at lighting company Lutron, we build a range of smart dimmers and smart lights, and previously had a short stint at a smart home startup called Hypersense, which was reimagining and reinventing HVAC systems in homes. I've always had this love affair with cars, industrial design, and architecture. Have a background in mechanical engineering, and that really spurred my interest in the intersection of hardware and software. It's a very exciting space to be. Specifically on this project that I'm going to talk through, I was the lead designer, having done a combination of research, interaction design, and motion design. And I had the option to work with some extremely talented visual designers and engineers to take this product to market, ship it, and make it a success. So what do I want to talk about today? A lot of you guys who are on the call would have probably researched and worked on the digital experience, right? Digital products, UI, UX. But when you start incorporating physical products into the realm, you have to reimagine how you approach the design process itself. So what I want to go through is just how to go beyond the digital and design for these mixed reality experiences. And specifically, in this project, I wanted to focus on how we conducted rapid prototyping and dealt with some severe hardware technical constraints while still being able to empathize with the user. Before I dive in, I really wanted to frame the problem that the UX team was brought from the business side a couple of years ago. So I'm sure a lot of you all are aware of the smart bulb Philips Hue, right? Lutron was building or creating its own line of smart bulbs a few years ago, meant more for luxury homes and large offices. So like while a Philips Hue could have 10, 15, 20 lights, we're talking about 100, 200, or even more lights in the range that Lutron was creating with far superior light output. This was meant, because it's for such large scale homes and large offices, it was meant to be sold to our installers only. So it's not a B2C product, it's more of B2B. But the real pain problem was that the setup process was extremely tedious. A lot of time and training was going into it from our installers and creating an incredible amount of friction in the adoption process. So why was it tedious? Now, I'll frame this again, this context up a little bit. Imagine you have 100 or 200 smart lights in the ceiling. For some of y'all who might have some smart bulbs, you know that the system itself does not recognize when you install it where these smart bulbs belong. So you need to tell the system that a particular bulb is in the living room or in the kitchen or in the dining room. Now, the previous setup process required a laptop with not the most intuitive user interface. So it was a desktop-based tool which reduced mobility on a large site. You needed to wire to a physical hub to get wireless access to the bulbs. And most importantly, the hub would randomly find a light somewhere on your same floor. It would flash it. An installer would have to find where that bulb was located, and then walk back to that laptop and say, hey, this belongs to, say, the living room or the kitchen. And you can imagine how tedious this process can be, especially when you have a laptop and something randomly flashing in the ceiling. And considering the construction site is so messy, it was definitely a pain point. So we did a bit of brainstorming, conceptual brainstorming, which I won't get through right now. But the concept that the engineering team and the UX team settled on was a mobile first approach, right? Using a smartphone, which affords mobility, which is available to everyone. Smartphone has superior wireless capabilities, so you don't really need a hub. But most importantly, it can connect directly to the lights. So it can detect nearby lights. So if you walk into the living room, it has the capacity to only find the lights that are, say, within a 2 or 3 meter range of where you are. So you're not walking around, and especially when you've got 100 and 200 lights on a massive floor, that can be very cumbersome. That being said, we realized that while this concept in theory seemed fantastic, we needed to ensure that the app itself required minimal training, and that installers could get their job done very quickly. So we started the design process. We did the usual jobs to be done in the scenarios. We did a few storyboards. But as we went through this, we began to realize that installers are not just interacting with the digital screens, they're going far beyond and interacting with the physical space. And if you felt this slide itself was a little disorienting, you can imagine, and I'll kind of walk through how disorienting at times it can be when you're trying to interact with a digital screen in a physical space. So during the wireframing process, initially, I kept sketching the physical reality along with the app screens, trying to imagine what that would be like as a user is interacting with the app. And here's an example of a few initial wireframes that we created. So for every screen that I was creating, there was an equivalent, what we call as a social life diagram to show, what is happening in the physical space as a user is interacting with the app. And you have this rudimentary version of a phone over here, but it helped us communicate, in design reviews to engineers and to stakeholders. However, as we went through this, I realized that this approach was still limited in truly understanding how users set up lights in a real space. We're still talking about doing everything on a screen or in a digital space. How do we truly imagine what a real space would feel like? But the problem is there were technical constraints. So any hardware, any smart lights, or any semblance of a smart light would not be available, would not be ready for another 6 months, which led to a lot of unanswered questions, right? How far could the phone detect the lights? How would a user interact with the app? How would they walk around? Leading to these constraints actually defining our UX approach. So we sat down, that is, the UX designers, engineers, and we thought, how might we actually hack hardware together? Right? This is a great opportunity to think out of the box. And we thought about, what is it that we can do to mimic colored lights that actually interact with the mobile app and can be built in days and detected through proximity? And we realized that the answer was in the palm of our hands. The smartphone, as you can see, the screen can mimic colored lights. It can interact with a mobile app, can be detected through proximity. And we built a hack that worked in days. So what did this hack look like? We called them as fake light phones. So we had a bunch of phones that were actually attached to the ceiling and that kind of were meant to mimic smart lights. So they were, initially yellow, the way normal lights would be when they're not set up. When the app came into the space, it would detect these fake lights nearby. So all of the fake lights in the range would turn light blue, and the nearest one would turn dark blue to indicate that that has been selected in the ceiling. Then the user would go through their app and say, this particular detected dark blue light belongs to the living room in, say, group 1, let's just say. Once that assignment was done, that light would turn green to say that, it had been assigned, and the app would automatically find the next dark blue light. And this was a very collaborative process between the UX and engineering. We used some of the initial wireframes that I showed you a couple of screens ago. And we had a bunch of 3 engineers who really helped us hack this prototype together. And here's what it kind of looks like. So as you can see, we have these phones up in the ceiling. Some of them, many of them are light blue, and one of them is dark blue. And a user can actually assign these. Now, this was an incredible learning experience for us, right? What did this help us learn? We actually had the option to get real users, real installers in and try this experience out. The first thing we realized is that users were still taking time to search for the lights in the ceiling. So what was actually physically the nearest light was actually not the nearest light that the app thought. That is because there was incredible amounts of wireless interference, right? We had used initial wireframes in the app, and we realized that some users didn't understand how the process worked. And lastly, we realized that the app was actually detecting fake lights in the neighboring room. So the setup that we had created actually had a wall in between. It didn't show in the video. There was a wall in between, and we had some fake lights on the other side of the wall. And we realized that the app was still detecting some of those lights across the wall, although they weren't the nearest ones, which is confusing for the user. The learnings were not just worked on by UX, but also by engineering. Right. So in terms of taking time searching for lights in the ceiling, we realized that there was feedback that we could improve on in the app. So We built in haptics and appropriate motion to inform the user when the next light has been found. So they don't have to always look at the screen. They can just look in the ceiling and get feedback through haptics. We also had, engineering improve the hardware and software. So stuff like the placement of the antenna or the algorithm that actually detects the nearest lights was tweaked based on this. In terms of, helping users understand how the process works, we tried to match the app to reflect the real space in every way possible, right? That was from matching the color of the light in the ceiling to what is on the screen, to using appropriate animations to indicate how the process works. And hopefully I'll be able to show you a video later of how it turned out. And lastly, engineering worked on the algorithm to ensure that lights in the neighboring room weren't being detected. And this was, as you can see, again, a lot of deep collaboration, but we worked together because the UX and engineering teams both realized the importance of a great experience and how we needed to work together to create that really homogeneous experience. So after months of iteration, testing, polish, as many of you all know what the process is like, we actually unveiled this at Smart Home Conference Celia. We have our product manager here, Chris Yogi, who is showing off the app. It's being, as you can see, cast on a screen behind with a bunch of installers looking on, and you can see one of these lights that's dark blue to kind of indicate that it's been found. And here's a quick video of what that experience was like. We went in for a dark theme for multiple reasons, but in this video, you can see, installer comes in, they can select a particular room, they select a light type. And now the app is searching for nearby lights. So it's found one, and the user says they want to assign it. They can toggle and search for other lights nearby. And now the user says it belongs to the window lights group. And as you can see, the app is reflecting the colors that are in the space. So the physical hardware, the physical light is also turning green and blue as the app is detecting it. Now we actually did an analysis of how much time this was reducing, and we realized in a controlled environment, this led to a 50% reduction in setup time. Like, it was a big deal. And not just the quantitative aspect, but qualitatively, we heard from installers that BLE activation, as this thing was called, was actually one of the biggest updates that they saw at that CEDIA conference from Lutron, calling it like a step function change. And everyone was prompting us to actually have this mobile-based approach for more smart home, more product lines in the Lutron product portfolio. So after seeing the user value and impact of this work, engineering and business, we are continuing to scale this framework to other Lutron products to ensure that we can go completely app-based and improve the installer setup experience for everything from small homes to massive offices. So that's all that I had for today. Thanks again for having me and hearing me out talk through this project. I'd love to hear any questions anyone has for me.
Thanks so much, Advait. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop your question in the chat. One question in our chat is, did you find interference to be a big issue when there was lots of lights? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Right. So initially, when we did the test, there were about 10 or 15 lights. Later on, as this was a 6 to 8 month project, we did find that interference did become an issue. There were a couple of ways, as I mentioned, that we tackled that both in the UX and the engineering side. So there was a lot of algorithm testing. We had like a site that was set up in the office to mimic about 100 to 200 lights in the ceiling. And what we did in the app specifically was there were a couple of things that we kind of did. Was we had initially we actually had a range meter to show which, like, how far a particular light is. So as you're walking around, you can see a light dropping out. We also had the ability to let a user actually adjust what the range of interference they want, like, or what the range of lights that they want. So for example, if you're standing in a spot, you don't want 100 lights being found nearby, you want only 20. So the app could find the nearest 20 lights, and at times that helped in solving the interference issue. So those are a couple of things. And even in terms of providing feedback, we try to continuously tell, through instructions in the app, we try to continuously tell the user what is happening. If a light can't be found, what they can do to actually find it, or if it's taking time to connect, why it might be taking time to connect.
Awesome. And we have one last question here from Kevin. We have, how many installers did you test with throughout the process?
So in every test, we were trying out about 5 to 6. We actually ended up testing a lot. So if you're talking about throughout the entire 1-year project, I think we might have tested with about 30 or 40 or even more. But in a single test at a time, it was often 4 or 5. And when I mean a single test, it means the test conducted within a 2-week window. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Advait. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Group 2 presenting Where's Petunia? Visualizing Serendipity in Collaboration. We have Soumya, Shelby, Antonio, and Kevin. Guys, you want to take it away?
Great. I'll go ahead and get my screen started. There we go.
Even I believe there's a little chat window probably open on the side, so it's blocking a section of the screen. Okay, yeah, it's minimized so we can.
Sorry, is it good now? Are we full screen?
You're not sharing anymore.
Okay, sorry. I knocked the everything down, threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect.
Very good.
Awesome. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we share a portion of our larger project, Where's Petunia? So let's get things started with some introductions. I'd like you to meet our team, Antonio, Kevin, Shelby, and I, Soumya. The project was undertaken as a graduate capstone for the master's degree in human-centered design and engineering at the University of Washington, with support from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and Pacific Marine Energy Center. Moving on to the next slide. So now with that out of the way, here's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of minutes. Background, how we started from marine energy, and then highlights from our interviews, which led us to understand the mindset of a scientist, our pivot to designing for trust and collaboration through design fiction methodology. We'll follow that up with some research through design process with co-design, video prototyping, next steps, and then finally wrap it up and answer some questions. Set? Okay, so let's talk about the background. Our project sponsors hypothesized that marine animal monitoring is limited by the battery life of the device. This made them wonder, what if we could replace the current forms of lithium-ion batteries with marine power? Crazy, right? They proposed that our team work with marine scientists and energy engineers to understand the context in which a marine energy-powered whale monitoring technology might be used, and hence design and prototype such a device. So as we started working with our collaborators, we thought we were getting into whales, marine energy, turbines, and monitoring devices. after a dozen subject matter expert interviews, here's what we learned. Marine scientists want extreme reliability.
Science is siloed.
If we go back one slide. So marine scientists want extreme reliability in their systems, and they prefer battery-powered devices, which have been tested in the field. Additionally, current sources of power are sufficient, and there is limited interest in marine energy at micro scale. So in our project, the marine energy power technology moved to the sidelines. It seemed improbable, and scientists did not want to talk about them. However, here's what they did have a lot to say about: silos and a desire to create a holistic understanding. On the next slide.
Science is siloed. So much of science is siloed. We need to like cross the silos.
We're very kind of focused on these small, narrow questions, which is great, but then we sort of lack the ability to look at the larger picture again.
So we need to understand entire ecosystems, the structure of ecosystems, the role the different species play in defining and maybe shaping or reshaping the structure of ecosystems.
So these were some insights from our research interviews. These helped us to generate
so much
mindset.
Of science is siloed. We need to like cross so much of science.
Mindsets. So we built mindsets to understand and empathize with our stakeholders without turning them into static silhouettes of imaginary people. Here's what a mindset of a scientist looks like. They favor the notion of collaboration, want to gain a big picture understanding, want more funding. It seems very competitive, and they wish there was more collaboration so that they could have more discoveries. And going on, that caused the pivot. Here's a visualization on the next slide from the Atlas of Science by Katie Bjorner. It shows that academic fields connected by co-citation are arranged in a ring. Essentially, the question that arises is that how might we build an ecosystem to find the missing dark field in the middle that will connect it all together? With all that meandering, we finally arrived at a design question that takes scientists' values and mindset into account. How might we envision a future of trustful scientific collaboration for serendipitous discoveries and cross-disciplinary research? And now Antonio will take us over to our design process.
So having learned about scientists' mindsets, values, and the work dynamics, working in silos, we wanted to speculate a future in the marine scientific community where those silos could be broken to foster collaboration. So from a designer's perspective, we wanted to use design as a tool to speculate how dynamics and synergies between scientists could be transformed in the future so that they can practice collaboration. So rather than designing a solution in the present to promote and enforce collaboration and data sharing at the cost of changing their current professional values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, we wanted to use design to show scientists how collaboration dynamics could be different in the future and get their reactions today in our present. So our goal was to open new perspectives by creating spaces for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being a scientist in the future. So we're all familiar with user-centric design frameworks like human-centered design and design thinking. We as designers typically design for the present and the very near future, usually about 2 years. But what about designing for future scenarios where we cannot fully apply design strategies like design thinking, human-centered design, and so on. So for our project, we question ourselves, how might we engage stakeholders from different scientific fields and backgrounds to use futuristic design strategies? How might we look far into the future to explore, prove, and critique possible alternative ways of collaboration and data sharing in the marine scientific community? And lastly, and most importantly, how might we encourage and inspire the scientific community, free their minds and imagination to appreciate other ways of future scenarios for collaboration in the research practices. So in our project, we use design fiction as a tool for design that goes beyond traditional UX design. We can think of design fiction as a design practice that aims to explore and criticize possible futures by creating speculative and often provocative scenarios that are narrated through design artifacts that come from the future. So because we're presenting an artifact from the future, we need to use storytelling to bring a future context to help materialize speculations about these possible futures. The props or design artifacts help us narrate the story in some sort of prototype. In this case, we use a video sequence. These props create affordances for the behavior of characters in the story and respond to the context of which they are part of. You can think of a video prototype in this context much in the same way as a prop in a futuristic movie or a science fiction movie. So, using design fiction as a tool to look into the future and speculate possible future scenarios for the marine scientific community by breaking collaboration silos, we then use these features as tools to better understand the present and discuss the kind of future scientists desire and what kind of futures they wouldn't like. The main intention of these futuristic context scenarios is to open up spaces of debate, explore, prove, and discuss among the marine scientific community. For our project, we designed an artificial intelligence virtual collaborator, which we call Cavity. And Cavity is a speculative prop. Cavity's role in our prototype is to facilitate new possibilities to embrace collaboration and data sharing using technology in the future. So now Kevin is going to go over how we actually materialize design fiction and how we put it in practice.
Great, thanks, Antonio. So we felt that design fiction would be the approach, but first we wanted to test lightweight props or artifacts in a co-design session with marine scientists. So we created a welcome mat for our co-design session to get the conversation started by using a LinkedIn mock-up. So when people see something that's familiar, they're able to react to it. So some of the reactions we had from this mock-up, in the mock-up we did, if you look at the orange, were where we kind of pushed the notion of collaboration from a scientific point of view. The scientists reacted like, LinkedIn is corny. I don't trust this. I don't trust it. LinkedIn's for business, not scientists. So we got a reaction, which was great. The next in the session, we showed a press release as another form of a lightweight artifact of design fiction. And this is a fictional riff on Tinder, the dating app, and we called it Cinder. We wanted scientists to hook up, not for after hours, but for sharing research and insights. This was meant to be provocative, and this opened up conversations about lived experiences what makes lived experience makes trust happen. It helps to build trust. For example, we had one professor in a session reach out and wanted to reach out and collaborate with other professors that had college-age children, so they might better gain insights on how to reach that age group more meaningfully when they're teaching in their classes. We also had early career PhDs felt barriers going outside their department or advisors. That was cheating, but they wanted more mentorship. They wanted more networking, so they wanted to expand. And then we had elder scientists share concerns about their data surviving after their death. They were like, hey, does my life work matter? So these lightweight things turned out to create some pretty rich conversations. And what's important is they opened up conversations that wouldn't have happened in traditional UX ways, like with card sorts or surveys or other traditional forums. This one, we used something provocative and got some really rich insights from people. And what's important to scientists is what we focused on. And here we see data sharing, discovery, trusted collaboration, and serendipity. They wanted these things to be part of their process. We wanted to show a little behind the scenes footage of the prototype here.
You have a 2-minute warning, Kevin.
Thank you. So let's move fast here. Thanks for that warning. So here we wanted to show the problem space of scientists fear getting scooped if that was taken out of the equation. Here we see a scientist reacting real time with shark data from international studies going on concurrently. So what might be possible if fear of scooping is gone? On trusted collaboration, we have a trust score that is brought forth by our artificial intelligence that would allow other aspects to come into play, to put trust, not just about your H score, your citation score, but also social media stuff, where more lived experience transactions occur. And then both those together create serendipity, that trusted collaboration and data sharing brings serendipity innovation together. And so that we were asking what might be possible in tackling some of the wicked problems of today if serendipity was amplified across silos. So next steps we want to do is we're going to further refine a video prototype, which unfortunately we couldn't show today because of time, but we're going to present again at a PNNL conference at the end of the month. We're going to re-engage marine engineers to create an actual physical prototype. And then we'd like to envision other scenarios to engage scientists that seem to be ambivalent about innovation because of the constraints of grant writing and money, and the fear of getting scooped with collaboration. So thank you for letting us run through that, and we'd love to take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Again, if anyone would like to ask a group questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. We have one question in the chat here. How do you pick the subject matter experts to interview? How do you make sure they represent the overall sentiment?
That's a great question. Soumya, do you have a thought about that? You want me to take it? I just talked a bunch, so.
Sure, I could take that. So the subject matter experts for our interviews were actually a bunch of scientists and engineers that our sponsors thought would be great to reach out to. We did study a little bit about their current research, their current work, and it was usually around marine energy, or they were studying whale monitoring and stuff like that. So that's how we chose our subject matter experts. And yeah.
And how do we make sure they represent? We got saturation pretty quickly. They started to repeat themselves and repeat the similar fears about being scooped really quickly into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. We have another one. Can you explain what you mean by design fiction?
Yeah, so design fiction, you can think of it as a tool, right? That you can actually envision a future different than what you have today and create some sort of artifact or something, right? In this case, it was the a virtual collaborator, and then bring it into the present and test it with your users and see their reactions. That's one way you can actually think of it. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Without further ado, we will move right along to group 3, challenges and opportunities with remote research on TV devices, presented by Chelsea Miller and Sophie Ambercar. Unfortunately, it seems like Sophie's power is out tonight. So Chelsea, I will turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, PhillyCHI. I'm Chelsea, and I'm a UX researcher at YouTube, and I'll be chatting about some of the challenges and opportunities that Sophie and I have kind of come across doing remote research on TV and connected devices. So I'm currently focused on doing research on our music experiences, and in even further drilling down on our integrations with other devices besides mobile. So I kind of work on anything but mobile, also some stuff on mobile, but looking at our music experiences on TVs, on smartwatches, on smart speakers, smart displays, various modalities like voice, and so on and so forth. Sophie is focused on research on YouTube TV. Hence our little intersection looking at kind of like all of these kind of, interesting experiences with our product besides our typical web and mobile offerings. And so prior to the pandemic, we did most of our research in person, in our labs, at our headquarters in the Bay Area. But of course, once the pandemic came around, we had to shift. And so, this is pretty challenging for our work on these devices like TVs and so on and so forth, which require a little bit more physical engagement with things like remotes, with buttons on the devices, using voice with microphones, things that were a little bit more challenging, both when it came to actually evaluating our current experiences that are in production, but also testing prototypes completely remotely. It's kind of difficult to have participants share a TV or smart display screen with us like they would maybe if they were on a phone or they were on web, for example. It's also challenging to kind of prototype, that experience, including like a remote and having kind of distance from devices and really replicating what that experience is really like for participants, especially, again, if they're kind of just using their own devices and having to replicate that. There aren't a ton of tools for prototyping like you would have for mobile or web experiences. And the other thing is that it also just makes it more challenging to test the experience of people who don't already own these devices. We could kind of test out a new user experience and have people come into the lab and use one of our TVs or the smartwatch or something like that. But it's a little bit more challenging if they don't have it and we want to try to test it remotely. So I'm hoping that you can leave this talk with some inspiration on how you can flex doing your remote research or prototyping on these devices, given the remote nature of our work, at least for some time ahead. And I can at least speak for myself, having done this now for 1.5 years. I think Sophie and I both have come to actually prefer it in some ways. So I can kind of walk you through our experience. So our goal early, once we switched over to doing all of this remote research, was just to kind of, again, make this testing more accessible for our participants, but also other researchers on our team and share these best practices. And kind of at a high level, our solutions were to leverage tools that participants would already have access to, or more likely have access to, like their phones, like a desktop or laptop computer, tablets, and either using those to record our experiences that are in production, or just kind of repurpose them to prototype either high or low fidelity concepts. And that's what I'll speak in a little bit more depth about. Kind of our first step was to rethink how we did that evaluative testing of products that are already out there in the world. And so something that we've been doing, and I even just wrapped up a study this week on it, is to ask participants to just simply record a TV or a smart speaker or a smart display using their phone or a laptop camera or some kind of mobile camera that they can kind of repurpose. And you might be thinking either, well, that seems pretty easy and obvious, or you might be thinking, oh, that seems like it's going to open up a lot of issues. And it's kind of both are true. There are some pros, and this is actually kind of a very simple way to approach this testing, but there are some things that you need to be aware of, and I can talk a little bit more about that. One of our early concerns primarily was that we wouldn't have control over the testing tools, the recording tools, so we wouldn't be able to observe the sessions clearly, and if participants aren't thinking aloud or speaking aloud very clearly and walking us through what's happening on the screen, we'd just be losing out so much data about what's actually happening with micro interactions. What would be happening on the remote? What if they're casting from another device? Would there be some conflict if they're trying to record with their phone and then they actually are typically casting, then they wouldn't have access to their kind of typical experience. So to kind of just walk you through first, our concern about getting clear screen recordings is to show you 2 screenshots. One is from when we were back in the lab, and one is from when participants were just recording themselves using a phone remotely. And so the one at the top was the one that a participant set up. And so, you know, goes to show it is possible to get a pretty clear recording, but some tips I have for you in order to make sure that that happens is to just try to get participants on the same page as you from the very beginning. When you're first contacting them about joining the study, you know, making it clear to them that this is going to be an important part of the study, that they not only have access to the TV or, you know, device that you're looking to test, but to make it clear to them that you're going to have them record it, making sure that they have access to a laptop or a phone that they can use as a camera, and just making sure that they feel comfortable with that. And even better if you can share a screenshot like this or a video showing them what you expect, so that they're going into the study and agreeing to the study with full expectations of, you know, what's going to be needed from them on their end to make sure that the study is a success. I'd also definitely recommend that you build in extra time at the beginning just to kind of go over this, make sure that they're set up. If you're going to be kind of transitioning between different parts of the study, like I recently did, where I was kind of exploring their current experience and then showing them some concept tests. Just make sure you're building in time so that they can make themselves comfortable between different setups that they might be sharing with you. And something else that was like a real benefit of this approach was that we actually got to see more naturalistic use in a way than we would have if we just were kind of relying on people coming into the lab. We can kind of see, well, okay, this is their setup. They maybe have some video game consoles or a sound bar, or they're using some other kind of inputs to control their TV. That's really important. We get context of where they've placed it in their home. We get all of this rich nuance that we wouldn't necessarily get if we were just using a testing device, which can be a pro in some cases, although in some cases, of course, you might want to have a very strictly controlled testing environment. But it was really helpful, and we found that even better, you know, we're not just getting out of the lab, which is, you know, highly controlled, not naturalistic. We can also kind of see more participants around the country, even around the world, than it might be feasible for us to do physically. You know, previously we would also sometimes do home visits and travel to other, you know, our users' homes or settings where they're using our products. But this kind of was a nice way of replicating that, even at a larger scale, since we wouldn't necessarily be able to travel to, you know, 20 different places around the country in a week, but we can do that from behind our computer screens. It's also really nice because we can test out, you know, a more familiar setup for participants. They're using their own devices and not having to kind of overcome, you know, testing on a device that they're unfamiliar with. So again, that might be part of the goals of your study. So, you know, it's always important to consider whether you want something that's familiar to them or you want to test something that's a new user experience. And I can chat a little bit more about that in the next section. Though, of course, it's important to note that, you know, there are some cons that you have to anticipate, which is that you will have a lack of control over the recording equipment and setup. As you can see from this image, hopefully it shouldn't get as blurry as something like this, but you might have overexposure, or you might have other things that kind of come up where it's just, you're not going to get as clear of a picture. And in that case, you know, it's just really important to, you know, make sure the participant knows that you need to hear them speak their thoughts aloud, so that way, if things are a little bit blurry, you don't see everything as clearly as you could due to constraints that might be out of your control, you're at least able to still capture that insight, while of course, hopefully helping them kind of work through that setup. Still though, the con here is that, you know, we're working mainly with existing device users. We do have some kind of like programs to think about sending devices out to participants, but that just requires a little bit more foresight. You might be working with the same panel over and over again. And so, you know, that's one of the limitations of that. So to kind of talk a little bit about how we can both get to new users of a device or just a feature or product and kind of overcome some of the prototyping challenges that we have encountered. We came up with some other scrappy approaches for testing screens that don't necessarily have very clear integrations with tools like Figma or, you know, other tools that you might be using. And so, you know, while the first kind of solution was really helpful for understanding what's currently out there, both for evaluative and foundational research, I should really clarify. You know, we also do a lot of iterative testing where we're exploring different concepts at various stages of fidelity and parts of the iterative development process. And so, you know, that's a little bit more challenging to send like a TV prototype to someone's TV, or to send a smart display prototype to someone's smart display, or so on and so forth. So we again sought ways to kind of leverage tools or devices that participants might already have access to in creative ways. And so, we found that for TV, it was pretty easy to kind of port over and kind of mimic the experience on participants, laptops or desktops, as long as we made sure that we gave them some kind of proxy for a remote or casting input, and making sure that they're not interacting with the prototype using, like their mouse. We could use like a keyboard, arrow keys as a D-pad, for example. So there were some ways maybe we can replicate it, but I can show you in a moment how we've kind of gotten around that using web for TV. And the really nice thing too is that using web, we can hand over those mouse controls, keyboard controls, so participants can interact with it. It's just important to kind of get them in that mindset and have them expect, like, okay, this is not your desktop anymore. This is now your TV. And just really make sure that you kind of ground them in that expectation. The other thing too that has been helpful is to kind of test early concepts, even just using slide decks. And that is helpful if we're not really focused on testing specific interactions, very detailed micro interactions, but just kind of getting a sense of concepts. We've still found it very successful to use slide decks, and kind of to tell a story. Something that I've used a lot with the designers I work with is we'll kind of like ground them in. Here's like the problem statement. We'll talk about that problem statement. Then we'll show the storyboard of kind of what the concept would look like, feel like, and then in the third panel, kind of what that impact would be on the original problem statement. And that's been helpful just to kind of get them thinking about those use cases beyond, having to test specific interactions themselves. And in those cases, if you're the moderator, you can just click through those screens, and it's easy to get some really scrappy insights back on concepts early on. But just to give you an example of what I was talking about with kind of testing those TV experiences, something that we've been doing is working with designers to kind of create prototypes where you are primarily, or the participant is primarily interacting with kind of like a minimal remote control, if you will, as you can see kind of on the bottom right, and asking them like, you need to kind of either click on that, or you can kind of click on your, again, arrow keys on your keyboard in order to interact with the prototype. Again, to make sure that they're not just clicking right on something on the screen with their mouse, which would be a very different experience than navigating with those arrow keys or a remote D-pad. And so what can be really helpful is to make sure that you have participants do some kind of practice task at the beginning of the session so that they kind of adjust their mental model to, okay, now I'm interacting with a TV. This isn't my laptop anymore. So something that's unrelated to the focus of your study, maybe something like just find something you want to watch, or find something in your library, or some other kind of task like that that's not related to your primary focus, just so that way it's an exploration. And then once they've warmed up, you can get into the tasks that you're really interested in. You've kind of gotten used to this new remote control, you're in the TV zone, and you can really dig into the questions that you have about the TV. Another thing that we've come up with, and I do a lot of research as well, looking at the experience on smart displays, is that a tablet is a really nice form factor to kind of replicate that experience and to use for prototypes, because it affords touch. You can do some kind of Wizard of Oz setups if you want to test voice commands, but it ports pretty nicely. And the other thing that's nice about tablets, they're a pretty similar screen size as a smart display, and they're portable. So you can ask participants to set it up, in a place where they, either if they are a current smart display user, maybe where they currently have their smart display set up, or if they aren't a current user, you can kind of think of a scenario and have them set it up, for example, in their kitchen, or in their office, or somewhere that that would be naturalistic for a smart display, where they're not going to be holding it like a tablet. They might be interacting with it more at a distance, like we would with a smart display. But you can kind of replicate that kind of, again, naturalistic use case using the tablet. And yeah, you can be pretty creative in terms of how the Wizard of Oz kind of interactions might work. If you're using voice, for example, you might ask them to try out some voice commands. Maybe on the back end, you're playing the wizard and advancing some slides, or kind of interacting with the prototype on their behalf. So it kind of feels like the voice commands are working without you having to necessarily fill out all of those capabilities. So again, you can kind of get the best of both worlds and approximate that experience early on and kind of see where things are working or aren't working. And again, kind of replicate that physicality of distance and multimodalities, even at the concept testing stage. So some pros of these approaches that I just talked about is that, again, you can reach more users. You can kind of capture people who aren't already using these devices and don't have them in their homes. And it's a low investment. You can kind of test these ideas as soon as they come about, using tools that you might already be familiar with through web and mobile, and kind of replicate them on other devices. Though, of course, some things to keep in mind is that it might be challenging for some participants to overcome biases towards these devices. And even if you give them some practice tasks and try to get them in the mindset that you are now using a TV or you are now interacting with a smart display, you know, they might carry some biases that, okay, I'm on a laptop and maybe, you know, or maybe I'm using a tablet. And it might be kind of hard to overcome some of those. So in that case, I would say not maybe necessarily the best approach if you really want to do that evaluative work or really dig into kind of evaluative usability, but it's great for early concept testing and kind of getting a sense of where friction might occur and things that you want to overcome, you know, before you really build things out in full. Some opportunities that we learned from trying out these solutions, you know, week over week over the past year and a half, is that this has really raised actually a lot of opportunities that we want to continue with, even, you know, moving forward once our offices are reopening and our labs are reopening and we can do in-person research. Is that, I mean, the great thing is that we've gotten outside of the Bay Area. So much of our research early on was just getting people who were local into the office and trying out these products. But now we can really, you know, do this testing anywhere in the world. And again, reaching people who might already own these devices or not, which is a really big opportunity for us. And we're continuing to explore ways to test these experiences at scale. We've already kind of tried that out using tools like user testing and just making sure that you have really clear instructions at the beginning to do unmoderated sessions. DScout has also been really great for diary studies and capturing video of these experiences. So we're continuing to explore that. I'm thinking if there might be ways to even scale it further to more quantitative explorations in the future. But again, overcoming some of those you know, challenges that I had already talked about. So that wraps up the main portion of the talk, but happy to answer questions or chat more about this talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Once again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you or drop them in the chat and we will pass them along.
And we do have one question in the Q&A feature of Zoom. It says, how did you find participants, ensuring they match your criteria?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess it depends. And Sophie and I have different criteria, but what I will say is, so for example, I can talk about like my most recent study, which was looking at the music experience on TVs. And this was more foundational research, actually. And so I was focused on recruiting people who are already pretty heavily engaged folks to understand like what are their workarounds, what are their go-to strategies for listening to music on their TVs, and just understanding that full experience. So I was looking for pretty heavily like kind of like, you know, pretty like extreme users in a sense of people who understand the product well. And then kind of from there, as the first exploration, I've now raised a lot of new questions that I need to do more focused recruits on people who, you know, maybe are casting primarily versus accessing their music in a different way. And working with my team then, like, you know, this is kind of, we had some concepts that we went in with. We got some feedback from these folks on kind of what's working, what isn't working. And then we can kind of have a different recruit. Or maybe it's not people who are super heavily engaged, but people who are only using it occasionally and understanding like, well, if we did incorporate these concepts, would that help, you know, with engagement and help get people using it in a way that might serve them better? Are there things that are limiting them from using it? And we can kind of take it from there. So that's kind of for that kind of study. If it comes to things where we're testing the new user experience, then at least for me, I'm typically just looking for people who love music and love listening to music, at least through streaming services. And it doesn't necessarily have to be as focused on device engagement, since I do want to understand kind of that new user experience. With Sophie, I think kind of like her focus for TV experiences is really looking at members who are already using YouTube TV, and maybe a little bit more focused on the devices themselves, having some familiarity there. So yeah, it kind of depends on the study, lots of different types of things that we're doing. But yeah, I think the main thing is just people who love music.
Awesome. We have one more question that popped into our Q&A. We have, how often do you test? Do you and your team take turns conducting the test? I'm in a small startup, so I'm trying to figure out a process for testing.
That's a great question too. So it kind of depends on the research, the phase of research that we're in. And I will say that, like, we do have like a fairly large team of researchers across YouTube as a whole, and even at YouTube Music specifically, where we kind of own different parts of the research. But I would say there's kind of like two cadences. We generally think quarter by quarter, what are our goals and what are kind of like the business goals for that quarter, and that'll help inform the research that we're doing over that quarter. Make sure that by the end of the quarter, our research output is informing either decisions being made at the end of the quarter or in the next quarter or in the next year or something like that. But with more iterative testing, we also sometimes do a faster cadence. And I think it just depends the kind of research you're doing. If you're doing more like foundational exploratory research, I think like quarter by quarter, you need more time. If you have something more iterative, even kind of like a bi-weekly schedule every 2 weeks could be nice, where you could kind of do some research, go back to the drawing board, do some iterations, and go back, and you can kind of keep up some quick momentum to move things forward. So I would say those are kind of generally the two kind of cadences that we would typically follow, but it can depend team by team, but that's kind of a typical one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our presenters tonight. I don't know about everyone else, but I am personally blown away by the creativity and the research and the solutions that came out of that evidence-based research as well. So moving right along to something super exciting, I'm going to turn the mic over to Raeesha and we will announce the raffle winners.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. Okay, let me. Yeah, firstly, thank you all the speakers for presenting such interesting and amazing work. We are almost at the end. I do have the 3 winners, and I apologize in advance if I'm going to butcher some names now. So the first winner is Beatrix Sendena for orchestrating experiences. The second one is Craig Whitney, and you get validating product idea book. And the third one is Laurie Guerzini, and it's a third book, Engaged. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to follow up with you guys by email and send you the physical book, no matter where you are in the world, but also heads up, it might take some time because of COVID delays. So passing it on to Ben.
All right, awesome. Congrats, raffle winners. Thank you again to all our speakers tonight. I learned a lot and had a great time just hearing about all these awesome projects. And thank you also to everyone who submitted to be a part of this event. We are now wrapping this up. We've come to the end. So thank you all, especially for being here. It's awesome to see how many people come out to these, even in the virtual times. We appreciate you staring at a screen for another hour or 2 of your day. I want to thank our sponsors again, especially Think Company for being our event sponsor tonight. If you enjoyed this event, please be sure to follow us on social. You'll be added to our email list if you aren't already. And I think that's it. You should get a link to a survey to let us know what you thought of this event as soon as you close Zoom. So if you have a minute to fill that out, we'd appreciate it. with that, thank you very much, and we will end the event. Stay connected. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
If
Thank you,
the
guys.
speakers
Have a good
have a minute
night.
to stay on.
Thanks all.
Have a good night.